This video is about citations, and in the second half of the video, I'm going to talk you through parenthetical in-text citations in MLA style, and also show you briefly how to make a bibliography for a web page and for a work in your anthology. Before we begin those practical applications, however, I want to spend just 1 or 2 minutes telling you about citations in academic settings. Citations are really at the heart of academia, which is a place where individuals with various levels of expertise in various different topics come together to share new ideas and research and to engage in conversations, mostly written on the pages of books and also in academic journals, but also sometimes take place in person at conferences and other events. In high school, your teacher may have told you that the important reason to use citations and to have a works cited page was to make sure that you didn't plagiarize, and that's certainly true. It is always important to make sure that you cite ideas that you received from other people, even if you've paraphrased or summarized them in your own words, and it's crucial to make sure that you attribute sentences and even shorter phrases, sometimes even keywords. Giving credit is an essential part of scholarship in American and most Western cultures. However, citations aren't just about avoiding plagiarism. We do want to give credit where credit is due, but citations also add to your own credibility, your ethos, if you will, as a writer. In the first place, having citations in your work shows that you have done your research. People can't accuse you of just speaking blithely about a topic. Instead, you use citations so that they can see that you have done an appropriate amount of research and are qualified to speak about the topic. Citations also allow other people to verify the ideas that you have presented. In science, an experiment is not considered accurate unless it can be reproduced by other scientists in different labs following the original directions to the same specifications. In the humanities, we often cite texts, and other scholars will go back to those same texts and make sure that individual words and phrases we have quoted are there and interpreted correctly, and also make sure that when we've paraphrased, we've done that correctly. In addition, if you cite material that's factual and that material happens to be wrong in your sources, although you might not have considered carefully whether your source is reliable or not, it at least means that you yourself are not responsible for the error, which again increases your credibility as an author. There's another side to citations that are equally important, and that goes back to the idea of academic writing being a conversation between multiple people. When you cite your sources, it allows other scholars to go to those same sources and find the same words or ideas and respond to you in kind. If you inspire someone to read a novel because you've described it in a particular way, you should ideally want your reader to find that novel and to find those ideas as easily as possible. For instance, if you had a schoolmate who wanted to know everything about me, Dr. Acker, and you said, "Oh, she likes coffee," and you couldn't remember how I liked my coffee, you could direct your classmate to the video I've made earlier this semester on the ways that I prefer my coffee and what constitutes a good cup of coffee to me. In some instances, that'll be as simple as directing someone to a YouTube video. That's true in this case. In other instances, you might want to direct someone to a web page or to a book, and sometimes there might be multiple versions of that web page or that book. People update websites all the time, and books sometimes get published in different versions in different countries. Harry Potter, for instance, has a different title in Britain and America to accommodate different cultural expectations. If you read Brian Reinhardt's article describing Shake Shack on the internet, it's very different from reading the same article in your textbook. Therefore, when you cite, you always want to give the author and the title of the work, but you'll also want to give what the Modern Language Association calls containers. That's details about the entity that's holding the text that you read, or the video that you saw, or even the image that you viewed. Sometimes a container might be something kind of abstract, like a class. If I told you something during class, you would only be able to cite the class session. Other times the container will be a physical book or another document. In other citation styles, other pieces of information matter just as much. In the sciences, for instance, dates are essential, and they go very close to the front of an entry in a works cited page. As you go through your academic career in college and afterwards, it's important to look into the citation styles that each field requires. For most of this semester, we'll be focusing on Modern Language Association formatting, shortly known as MLA, and you'll be citing the author, the title, and a few other key facts about each text that you read and from which you gather any information, whether it's directly quoted or whether it's inferred, paraphrased, or summarized. Let's look at some examples.
For this exercise, we're going to assume that I'm writing a rhetorical analysis of Brian Reinhardt's review of Shake Shack. I've written 2 sentences that would probably be the beginning of my paragraph on ethos. First I say, Brian Reinhardt's allusions to dozens of other Dallas restaurants establish his rhetorical ethos, or credibility. Then I say, to give support for this, he lists 14 restaurants in the 3rd paragraph of his review alone. So far, I've used 2 sources: Brian Reinhardt's essay on Shake Shack, and also some source, which happens in this instance to be the Silva Rhetorica, from which I've determined that ethos means credibility. I need to do 2 things. First, I need to write a works cited page for both of my 2 sources. After that, I need to insert parenthetical citations into my sentences so that the reader knows to look in my works cited page and can then use my works cited page to find that particular information very precisely. You might be asking, many students do, whether you have to cite a piece of information if you yourself already know it. You may have known that ethos is credibility for a long time, but again, we go back to the basic reasons for citation. First of all, you want to make sure that your authority is clear, that your reader knows that you've done the appropriate amount of rhetorical research so that you're qualified to speak about these rhetorical terms with authority. In addition, if your reader doesn't happen to be as familiar with rhetoric as you are, you want to give your reader a stepping stone so that your reader can do this rhetorical research for himself or herself. Therefore, although you could contend that ethos is a fairly commonly known term, in this instance, to continue the academic conversation and establish our own credibility, we're going to cite both of these sentences to the best of our ability. We're going to start with the works cited page because that's how our reader finds the sources that we've used. Here on the right is the ethos page from Silva Rhetorica, which will hopefully feel familiar. You can see that this website has a lot of information all over it. Down at the bottom, it has the author of the website, the name of the website. Up at the top, it has the name of the page. We also know that this website is sponsored or published by Brigham Young University. And if we go to the first page of the website, we'll find out that this website was last updated during 2016. MLA has us find approximately 9 pieces of information for each material that we cite. We're going to start with the author. In this case, we know from the bottom of the page that the author's name is Gideon Burton. When we write a bibliography entry or a works cited entry, we put the author's last name first to help with alphabetization if we have more than one source. If the author gives a middle initial, we always want to reproduce the author's name exactly as published. That's a sign of respect. When you first refer to another author in writing, you'll use that author's full name, in this instance Brian Reinhardt or Gideon O. Burton. After that, if you refer to them, you will not take the familiar step of calling them Brian and Gideon, as if they were your friends, but instead you will continue to refer to them by last name, partially as a sign of respect and equality, but also to make it easier for your readers, again, to find your sources in your works cited page. So, I have Gideon Burton's name, and I know that the title of this page is Ethos. I'm going to put that in quotation marks to make it clear that it's just a single web page rather than an entire website. The next thing I'm looking for is the container. So this web page is contained on a large web site called the Silva Rhetoricae. To symbolize that it's larger than just a page, I'm going to type Silva Rhetoricae and italicize it. And then each other piece of information that I can find from the MLA list, I'm going to include after the container separated by commas. We always separate the author and the title with periods to make sure that everyone is clear that those are the 2 most important pieces of information, and any other information we have we separate with commas. The important thing about the new MLA, which was just revised a few years ago, is that if there's information that isn't provided, you leave it out. We don't put in any markers that indicate that something was unfindable. In this instance, there isn't any evidence that anyone besides Gideon Burton has assembled the Silva Rhetorica website. Therefore, we don't have any other contributors. We're going to leave that out. We also don't have any kind of version. We don't know if this is the first version of the website, the second version, or the 10th version. So again, we're going to leave the version out, and the same is true for number. However, we do have a publisher. We know that Brigham Young University has sponsored this website. We also know from the first page, the opening page, sometimes you'll have to go back to that first page, that this was last updated in 2016. And so that's the date that we're going to use. If there are multiple dates, you can put the most recent update first and then put the earliest date you can find in parentheses afterwards. And finally, in this case, we want to give someone else the location. Ethos is located on a website, and so in this instance, the location of this information originally is the URL given at the top of the page. We're going to take out the HTTP : because every website has that and we don't need it here, and then we finish our citation with a period. Now let's do Brian Reinhardt's text. We found Brian Reinhardt's material in the Cross Currents in Composition textbook, which most of you watching this website probably have. You can get some pieces of information off the cover of the textbook, but it's usually easier to use what we call the title page, which is where the title and a lot of the other important information exists. In this instance, we also need to go very quickly to the first page of the article, because that's the page on which we know important things like the title and like the author of the article. Let's work through the same list. We already know that this article was written by Brian Reinhardt. Again, as with Gideon Burton, we put Reinhardt's last name first so that when we refer to him as just Reinhardt, the reader will be able to go immediately to that entry in the Works Cited page. The title we have here, Shake Shack Makes a Good Burger and a Good Metaphor for Dallas Dining. As with Ethos, because this is the title of one short piece of work in the middle of a much longer book, we're going to put that in quotation marks. And as with the other version, we're going to separate the author's name with a period right here, and we're going to separate the name of the book with a period. Back to the title page. It's called Cross Currents in Composition, and we're going to italicize that to show that this is the title of a larger container. For a nice treat, we actually have other contributors. In this instance, you know from right here on the title page that David Hansen, the chair of the English department here at Southeastern, and Natasha Witten, who runs freshman English here, both helped edit this particular book. So they would become two of our contributors. So we have the author, Brian Reinhardt, the title, Shake Shack Makes a Good Burger, the title of the container, Cross Currents, and two contributors. The next thing we need to know is there a particular edition? Right under the title, we can see that this is the second custom edition for Southeastern Louisiana University Department of English. We can leave the Department of English off because I don't think that anybody's producing Cross Currents in Composition for any of the other departments. However, this isn't the second custom edition of Cross Currents overall. This is the second custom edition for Southeastern. So we need all of that information to be part of our version. Normally, this would be a lot shorter. It's just because your textbook is so customized to this course that we need so many details. So we're going to type that this is the second custom edition for Southeastern Louisiana University. In this instance, we don't have a number, and that's true of most books. We'll get into numbers more as we do more research and look at things like journal articles and magazines. We do have a publisher, and we find information about that publisher on the back of the title page. So I've turned the page. This is the front of the title page. This is the back. And it gives you a lot more details about where particular things in here come from. On here you can see that this book that is taken from two other books, Writing Today and Literature and Introduction. And then down here you have copyright information just for our textbook, which was copyrighted in 2020 by Pearson Education. Add Pearson Education, and then the date in which the book was published, 2020. The last piece of information we need is the pages, and again, this goes to making life easier for your reader. You already know where the article is in the space of this textbook, but your reader, if handed the textbook, would have to take a few minutes to find the article. So in this instance, the location, not a website, is actually just the pages that the article spans in Cross Currents itself, the textbook. The final thing that we need to do is format this in accordance with MLA formatting. So here we want to turn it into Times New Roman, size 12, and then we're going to create what's called a hanging indent, which is usually created through the paragraph menu. On the paragraph menu, you go to Special, and then Hanging, and you can specify you'll always want it to be indented by exactly 1/2 of an inch, and that will indent each line. If this were a formal essay, of course, we would also want to make everything Times New Roman, and in this instance, we would also want to double space it. Now, the last thing that I need to do is add in-text citations, and I can do this in 2 separate ways. If you'll remember, my claim is that Reinhardt uses ethos, which is a form of credibility. I want my reader to know that they can find credibility in Gideon Burton's article. I'm going to put his last name in parentheses immediately after the information I've learned from him. If my reader goes down to my Works Cited page, they'll see under the name Burton that I have listed Gideon Burton and then the website from which I got that information. If I have multiple rhetorical terms, I can cite the single website, or I might want to add ethos so that my reader knows exactly which information is on exactly which page. I can't put a page number here because Burton's website doesn't actually have page numbers. It just has individual pages of all disparate sizes. Here, I don't need ethos because this is the only piece of information I've gotten from Burton's site. Here I have he lists 14 restaurants, which isn't very clear here. It could say Reinhardt. And if I say Reinhardt lists 14 restaurants in the 3rd paragraph of his review alone, the only piece of information I need is the page number on which that happens. Here are the 14 restaurants. They're all in this section in the 3rd paragraph right here. If I have Reinhardt's name right here in the beginning of the same sentence, I don't need Reinhardt's name in my parentheses. However, if I did say he, as I already had earlier, then I need Reinhardt's name in every single parenthetical citation where he is not directly mentioned in the sentence itself. Even though I described Reinhardt in the previous sentence, I want to make sure that my reader is not confused about whether I'm referring to Burton or to Reinhardt in this sentence. So I can either say he lists 14 restaurants in the 3rd paragraph of his alone and cite it to Reinhardt, or I can say Reinhardt lists 14 restaurants in the 3rd paragraph of his review, in which case I do not need to include his name in the parenthetical citation. In every case, the parenthetical citation, whether it's Burton or Reinhardt, links my reader down to a direct source in my Works Cited page. And whenever my source has page numbers, as right here, I'm going to give the particular page within the source on which the information can be found. Ultimately, this helps me communicate with my readers, and it helps my readers both verify the things I've already said. All of you have enough information here to find this within a few seconds in your cross-currents book and make sure that Reinhardt really does list 14 restaurants in the 3rd paragraph of his review. And also, it gives you a place to start if you're interested in more details about either topic. With the information I've given, you can go to the Brigham Young website and read about ethos in more detail. Similarly, if you want to learn more about Brian Reinhardt's use of ethos, particularly if you want to communicate with me and add something else to the research and the argument that I've already done and made, you yourself have the tools you need to go to Brian Reinhardt's essay, to read it for yourself, and then pull your own piece of information out of what I've already presented. This kind of communication is at the heart of scholarship, and it's the biggest reason that all scholars try hard to cite all material that they've found from any source in order to maintain and perpetuate the academic discourse.